Hi, my name is Ember Kelley, and I'm the Director of Religious Education at the Fourth Universalist Society in the city of New York. You may know that the Unitarian Universalist Association has 7 principles which we hold not as dogma, but as guiding beliefs. So in today's video, I have the honor to get to sit down with Reverend Schuyler Vogel, our senior minister, and discuss the proposed 8th principle, which deals explicitly with issues around racism, white supremacy, and oppression, and how those exist in our church communities, and how we can do better. So I hope that you enjoy today's video. Thanks for stopping in. Hi, everybody. My name is Ember Kelley, and I'm really excited to get to sit down with Reverend Schuyler Vogel to make this video kind of talking about the 8th principle, the proposed 8th principle in the Unitarian Universalist Association. We're going to talk in this video a little bit about what exactly are principles and just about the specifics of this one and about what adopting it exactly means. So Reverend Schuyler, thanks for joining me to make this video today.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Reverend Schuyler, do you happen to have on you the actual wording of the 8th principle for our listeners to hear?
I do, and I can share it. So these are words that would go after the 7th principle, the 8th principle of Unitarian Universalism. Here they are. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote. That's the intro to all the principles. But this is the 8th principle that we would be adding. Journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions.
They have mentioned there's often, as the RE teacher, I know that there is the kids version or the simplified language version. And I have found a version that has been proposed for that, which would be, we work to build a loving community that treats everyone fairly, whatever their skin color or group. So, Reverend Schuyler, for those maybe not familiar, what exactly are principles in the UUA? It's kind of a big question, but don't take more than half an hour.
Yeah, well, it is a big question and it's a complicated question, but principles have their origins in the original merger of the Unitarianism and Universalism back in 1961, and from that merger came 6 principles that were formulated by the union of these two denominations, and for many years they were these 6 principles. Starting in the 1980s, there was increasing conversation within Unitarian Universalism that these principles were outdated, that they used predominantly male language and needed some significant revision. So so there was a process that the UUA underwent to rewrite them, to redefine them, largely pushed by feminist and women's groups within the UUA, and there was some pushback around that, some pushback around changing what was that point considered traditional, time-honored UU language, but also pushback because a lot of the changes that were being proposed were changes that took out a lot of the explicitly Christian or theistic language. So what came out of that eventually was a compromise, a rewriting of 6 principles into 7 principles, and the creation of a separate set of language that became the sources. So we have our 6 sources, we have our 7 principles currently. These were created, they're ratified in the 80s, and in the 90s, another source was added to include earth-centered traditions, and those are what we have today. So the thing that to take away from these principles is that, first of all, they are a living document that are created to reflect the life and values of Unitarian Universalism in the moment. They have changed significantly since they were first introduced in the 1960s. The language from the 1960s version to the 1980s version is very different. They basically rewrote all of them, and they also added the 7th principle, which wasn't there originally, which is about environmentalism and interdependence. So there's a long history of Unitarian Universalism having principles. The exact form in which these principles are written, are expressed, varies drastically. I think it's also important to note that the principles as we have them today, the 7 principles, are not supposed to be a creed. You heard me read the eighth principle in that little preamble. The member congregations of the UUA, covenant to affirm and promote. So this is a covenant of affirmation and promotion. It is not a belief structure. It is a way of being together. It's a covenant, an agreement of congregations and individuals to affirm and promote these values. So in that way, they're not like a creed. They're not doctrine. You don't have to sign and repeat them in services, but they're a way of centering the core values of Unitarian Universalism and making sure that when it comes down to it, we have some orientation about what we're doing together, almost like a mission statement. So the eighth principle effort is a desire to center what I would think and what I think a lot of UUs believe is a core learning of Unitarian Universalism since these were last revisited. And that is an awareness around anti-racism and anti-oppression that is easy for UU congregations to ignore unless it's centered in something as foundational as our principles.
I mean, and so from the sound of it, especially since the 80s, this is, meant to give us some flexibility and better understanding and defining what our focuses are, what we want to be doing as a denomination.
That's right. That's right. It allows us to return to them again and again when we are wondering, what are we doing? What are we for? When newcomers come to learn about us, we can say, here are our principles, right? Here are what we care about and what unite all of us. But it's also not stuck in stone, right? Unitarian Universalism, as all religious liberalism, believes that truth and wisdom and knowledge is unfolding, and that the longer time passes and the more that we sincerely pursue truth, we will gain it. And so part of why these are living documents, living words, and why they're supposed to be revisited, every number of years, is that we expect that we will change and learn about the world. And racism, of course, is something that a lot of Americans these days have had some awakening around. It's a long overdue awakening, but it certainly is important and one that a lot of folks in our UU community believe should be institutionalized.
So in terms of the institutionalizing, what exactly does adopting this look like? But whether as a congregation or in the denomination as a whole, what does it mean to adopt a new principle?
Generally, decisions around principles are made on the denominational level. So an official decision would have to be made with the UUA, and usually those decisions are made at the annual meeting, which is called General Assembly. So those meet once a year. We send delegates from Fourth Universalist, usually 4 to 5, and they can be you if you want. Just let us know. We have a whole process for determining who goes. And there'll be a lot of debate and discussion, and the principles will be revised. This is not even the only principle revision that folks are talking about. On a congregational level, congregations can lend their support to this work by ratifying it themselves. A number of congregations have done this. They have said, we believe in the eighth principle. We believe in codifying anti-racism into the core language of our faith tradition, which are the principles. So congregations meet, they discuss a little bit what we've started to do. Racial justice leaders in congregations say, this is really important. We need to learn more about it. We need to have learning opportunities. We need to have services about it. And ultimately, I think where I would see this going at Fourth U, if there's a desire, and I hope that there would be to have a congregational meeting, vote about it. So whether that's at our annual meeting or a separate meeting, to ratify it and say, this is what we want to do, that we're a congregation that doesn't just see 7 principles, but sees that without this other core principle, the work of racism, of combating white supremacy is easily lost. It's easily neglected. We see this a lot in UU spaces, right? That unless you're very explicit about being anti-racist, anti-racism work, support and advocacy for BIPOC people gets lost by the white majority that is Unitarian Universalism. And so putting this in here makes it almost impossible then, or at least makes it less likely to be neglected, even by those people who might have that tendency to do that.
When I think speaking as a trans woman who's dealt with faith communities, many faith communities like to maybe label themselves as open to all, welcoming. They use that language, but it definitely makes a difference to really have real, a solid commitment to it and accountability around that. So that's one of the things about this is that it has this accountability worded into the principle itself. What do you think is like the pro, maybe if there is any cons about including that? It seems to me to make sense that there is a method of like saying, not only are we committed to this, but we're committed to making sure that we're doing this work and being accountable about it. What kind of feelings do you have about that?
Well, accountability is really important. And I think accountability can often be perceived as meanness or having an edge. We see a lot of conversation right now about cancel culture and how mean that is to people who act badly. But accountability in this context, and I think in that context also, simply means that we have to recognize that our words and our actions have impact on other people. And that if that impact is hurtful, that impact marginalizes people, if it dismisses the experience of other people who are with us in this life, that we are called back and sometimes called out for our actions. That we are not autonomous individuals who get to do or say whatever we like. And that's especially true with issues like racism. It's true with issues of transphobia and all these isms that get to the heart of who we are as people and the kind of communities we want to be. So we don't, in Unitarian Universalist spaces, or we shouldn't anyway, allow people to do whatever they want all the time because that hurts people. And so accountability is the mechanism that we use to protect those who have not been protected, to give them the space and the power to ensure their own safety, and ensure that we aren't a toxic space for people who have historically been marginalized. So it's not something that should be feared. Certainly, as a white, straight, cis man, we are often held accountable and should be held accountable because it's part of our learning process. We've been steeped in all the same supremacies that everyone has, and they've been internalized, I think, in really toxic ways that keep those people like me from being spiritually whole in the way that we need to. You can't be racist, right, and be spiritually whole. You can't be xenophobic and be spiritually whole. And so this is also the work of faith development for those white people who, in terms of race, need some reflection and accountability to hold them to the larger truth that we believe around systematic change.
I suppose as a final question for us to ponder as we wrap up this video is, why specifically name racism in the principle? It does say racism and other oppression, so it's not that they're forgetting that other oppressions exist, but why do you think it's important that they name racism?
It's a really good question, and it's something that I think has garnered and will continue to garner a lot of conversation around this particular principle. I know that the originators of this proposal, this eighth principle, spoke about how racism is in some ways the original sin of the United States. That there are certainly a lot of other sins that exist in this country and in humanity, but that racism stands out as something that not only our country has failed to embrace, anti-racism has failed to embrace that, but also our denomination has really struggled with it in a way that it hasn't struggled with other oppressions. Our denomination has not been perfect in all ways of fighting oppression, but we were among the first to ordain women. We were among the first to ordain LGBTQ folks. And yet we consistently, historically, and currently have disappointed and betrayed people of color in our faith tradition. Again and again, we have fallen short in that work. And so I think part of the effort here is to point that out and say, look, we're doing okay, not perfect, with women in leadership. A majority of clergy who are UUs are women. That is progress. It's not 100%. We still have a lot of work to do, but there's some progress there. But UUism has not found some reckoning with racism. We are hugely white. We have hugely problematic recent history around racism, and the belief is that unless we really institutionalize our commitment to anti-racism, that we will continue to live out these sins in deeply harmful and painful ways for BIPOC members of our community and also for the larger United States.
I think that was very succinctly put. Reverend Schuyler, thanks for joining me to make this little educational video for our community and for any of those who may stumble upon it as part of the wider UU. It was wonderful to get to chat about this.
Thanks, Ember, and I look forward to having more conversations as we move ahead.